We've been handed some really fascinating material here. This isn't just theory, right? This is a deep frontline look at what's happening in the enterprise AI and software market. And it comes straight from research at JPMorgan. We're talking interviews with over 30 key players, the system integrators, the vendors, and, the huge corporate customers who are actually signing the checks.
That's right. And our mission today is really to unpack the big structural shifts in how large companies spend on IT.
Yeah.
We need to focus on, I think, two main things. First, where is massive value being created right now? And second, how is the whole decision-making process for those enormous budgets actually changing? This gives us the map.
And it gives us a perfect place to start because the central claim, the thing that just leaps off the page, it's about one specific tech company. Based on these interviews, one company is described as, and I'm quoting here, leading everyone by at least 10 light years.
And that company is Microsoft.
10 light years. I mean, in tech terms, that's a galactic distance. So let's dig into what that actually means. When they say 10 light years, it's not about having one faster chip or a single killer app, is it?
No, not at all. It's about integration. Precisely. The research shows the lead isn't just product depth. It's about a complete coordinated product system. Microsoft has very systematically built this preferred platform for AI deployment because everything just works together. They're removing all that friction.
Okay, but for you listening right now, companies are always throwing jargon around. How are they doing it? What's this ecosystem actually made of?
They're doing it by building AI capabilities directly into the products companies already pay for and use every day. The sources, for example, they mention things like WorkIQ and FabricIQ.
Okay, break those down for us.
So think of WorkIQ as the AI that lives in your daily tools, help you draft emails in Outlook or summarize a meeting in Teams. It's the productivity layer. Then FabricIQ is the AI-driven data platform on the back end, making sure all your company's data is clean, connected, and actually usable.
So they're not asking you to build some new separate thing. They're injecting the AI right into the company's bloodstream, connecting the work people do with the data they have instantly.
That's it, exactly. The goal is this unified system that boosts efficiency and gives you immediate insight instead of, forcing you to spend months stitching a dozen different tools together.
And how does that compare to the competition? What are the sources saying about, say, AWS and Google?
Well, the contrast is really interesting. While Microsoft is going for that whole workflow, the interviewees see AWS as still focusing mostly on the core infrastructure.
The plumbing.
The plumbing, yeah. The raw power, the security, they're winning the foundational wars. And Google, meanwhile, is really doubling down on the data and analytics side, trying to win that data intelligence battle with their powerful models.
So that difference in strategy workflow versus infrastructure, it must show up in real-world spending and staffing, right? Do we have any hard evidence of that from the research?
We do, yeah. There was one really telling piece of information from a source in the federal government. They said that their institution's Azure team is now, and I quote, significantly larger than their AWS team.
Wow.
That's not just a small shift. When you move your people, you're signaling that a platform has become mission critical. It fundamentally changes the conversation.
Okay, so we've established the platform lead. But, a great platform is kind of useless if no one's paying for it. So let's talk about the money, because this leads us right into what the report calls the financial reckoning. AI adoption is speeding up over the next year, year and a half. But this isn't the same cautious experimentation we saw last year, is it?
No, not at all. We're seeing these AI projects move out of the trial phase.
Sandbox.
Exactly, the sandbox. And they're going into serious production. And the key thing here is just the scale of the money involved. The budget jump is substantial.
Okay, so give us the numbers. How big a jump are we talking about?
We're talking about a leap from what the report calls pilot scale. So that's maybe $250,000 to $500,000 straight into production-grade deployment. And that's between $2.5 and $5 million.
Whoa, that's a 10x jump, minimum. That kind of increase doesn't happen without a huge shift in who's approving the spend.
You're absolutely right. And this is probably the most crucial takeaway here for anyone in the tech space. 3 years ago, the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, they ran the show. They made the decisions. Now the sources are explicit. The CFO and the finance departments are reviewing and increasingly controlling IT spending.
So the gatekeeper has changed from the tech visionary to the person who's laser focused on cash return. What does that actually mean for these projects? Does it kill off the long-term, high-risk R&D?
That's the big question. It definitely needs a focus on shorter cycles and clear, measurable ROI, return on investment. If you can't show a clear financial return and quickly, that project is going to have a really hard time going from a pilot to that $5 million production budget.
So with the CFO in charge, does that mean IT budgets are just exploding everywhere, or is it more targeted?
Not exploding, no. The pipeline is described as healthy. But there's something else interesting. Even with all the focus on AI, there's a lot of backlogged spending on the core systems, your CRM, your HR software, your ERP.
So you still have to maintain the engine while you're bolting on the new jet wings.
Precisely. You have to update those core systems just to handle the data and the scale that the AI demands. So the budget is catching up on maintenance that was probably delayed.
That makes a lot of sense. So if the CFO is demanding ROI, they need to see proof. This brings us to the next section. The proof in the ROI. What's the concrete evidence driving this investment? There must be a killer example in the report.
There is. The research shows that AI's ROI is now measurable. It's not theoretical anymore. And the best case study, the real aha moment, comes from the biotech industry.
Okay, tell us about the biotech example.
Right, so in biotech, the process of screening molecules to find new drugs traditionally took about 5 years. It's incredibly slow and expensive. With AI, clients are now reducing that entire cycle down to just a few weeks.
5 years to a few weeks, that's not an improvement, that's a time machine.
It's a time warp. It saves millions in R&D costs immediately.
Yeah.
You're taking a return that was half a decade away and getting it in less than a single quarter. Now, that's a language the CFO understands. It takes all the ambiguity out of the sale.
Absolutely. So before we move on, you mentioned something earlier about inference costs. For you listening, can you quickly explain what an inference cost and why it's so important that it actually impacts COGS, the cost of goods sold?
Yeah, that's critical for understanding the CFO's mindset. An inference cost is the ongoing cost of actually using the AI model.
Yeah.
Every time you ask it a question or get a prediction, that costs computing power. Now, if your product relies on that AI, say, for a recommendation engine, that inference cost becomes part of your cost of goods sold.
Which means it directly eats into your profit margin for every single transaction.
Exactly. It's not a one-time fee. It's a continuous operating expense. So it has to be managed really, really carefully.
Got it. Perfect. So back to these internal solutions. When companies are building them, are they building their own huge language models from scratch?
No, not at all. The system integrators in the report say that most enterprises are building on top of the established players. They're using the APIs from OpenAI and Anthropic mainly. They're focusing on the application layer, not reinventing the foundational model.
That's a critical distinction. So the model is built, the ROI is proven, the money is there. Let's talk about competition and data infrastructure. Microsoft has this lead, but the market's not standing still.
Definitely not. AWS is seen as the closest competitor, and everyone expects them to work on closing that integration gap. And Google is described as agile, keeping pace very quickly, especially on the data side. So the race is absolutely on.
Okay, let's look a layer deeper then at the data battlefield. The report highlights massive investment here, which brings us to the big rivalry, Snowflake versus Databricks.
Yes, and this is a really nuanced fight. Both are growing incredibly fast, which just shows how much money is pouring into data modernization. But the choice between them often boils down to a company's internal culture.
What do you mean by that, a cultural choice?
It's about where the power sits inside the company. So business-oriented firms, think traditional finance or retail, they tend to lean towards Snowflake. It's easier to use, it's a managed service, it's built for business analysts.
Okay, and the other side.
Technology-oriented firms, companies with deep engineering teams, data scientists, they lean toward Databricks. You give them more flexibility, more control, more tools for machine learning. It's really a different philosophy.
And I imagine big companies are probably using both, right?
That's right. It's not always a winner-take-all situation. But there's a key detail in the research that again points back to Microsoft's advantage. It notes that Databricks adoption on Azure saw a big uplift in Q3. So even Databricks grows faster when it's running inside that dominant Microsoft ecosystem.
Everything seems to be pointing in the right direction then. But the report does flag some challenges, some structural headwinds that are slowing down a full-scale rollout. We've talked about cost scrutiny, the inference costs. What are the other big obstacles?
The second major hurdle is what the report calls the standardization gap. There's a lack of, quote, repeatable, standardized use cases. So a company can build one amazing solution, like that biotech example. But figuring out how to create a blueprint to apply that success to dozens of other parts of the business, that's the hard part. The templates don't really exist yet.
The tech works, but the playbook for scaling it is still being written.
Exactly. And the final one is less about tech and all about people. It's change management. Just getting an organization to change its behavior, to trust the AI, to redesign workflows, that remains a massive bottleneck. You can deploy tech way faster than you can change human habits.
That's a perfect summary of where things are. So let's try to boil this all down for you, the listener. If we had to pull 3 essential takeaways from all this, what are they? Number 1, for me, is the massive value of a deeply integrated ecosystem. That 10 light-year lead for Microsoft isn't just marketing hype, it's a real operational advantage.
Number 2 is the financial shift. AI is no longer an experiment. We're in the era of serious multi-million-dollar production deployments. The market is maturing very, very quickly.
And number 3, the CFO is now the gatekeeper, and the CFO demands clear, short-term ROI. They want to see that 5-year research cycle turn into a few weeks. It's about measurable cash return, period.
And if you connect all that to the bigger picture, it suggests that while the big platforms are dominant, there's a huge opportunity for those specialized picks and shovels companies. The shift from the CIO to the CFO is completely redefining what tech gets bought. It's not about the coolest new thing. It's about what delivers quantifiable efficiency. And that raises one last important question for you to think about. The source material mentions this growing demand for very specialized services, things like compute scheduling to keep inference costs down, and the rise of the vector database.
Just quickly, before you go on, what's a vector database?
Think of it as a special kind of translator. It's a database designed to make all of your company's private data understandable to a large language model. Without it, the AI only knows what it was trained on from the internet. With it, the AI can instantly search your internal documents, your emails, your reports. It's essential. Right. So knowing that most large companies are actually building their own AI solutions, not just buying them off the shelf, it creates immense internal complexity. So here's the final question. As these companies build their own complex AI stacks, will the market power eventually shift away from the big platform giants and move towards the specialized orchestration tools that help enterprises actually manage all that complexity and stay profitable? That might just be the next big battleground.